Spiritual maturity is not a product of age. On Sunday from Genesis 35 we looked at 5 ways in which Jacob at last starts to grow up and assume responsibility for leading his family. He matures as a result of obedience. Through that obedience he then gets to experience the faithfulness of God. He worships, he has to let go of the man he was, and he faces opposition. Is this so only for Jacob? Peter grows up in much the same way. It all starts when Jesus, after borrowing his boat to use as a pulpit, tells him, "Put out into deeper water and let down the nets for a catch." Obedience, after only a little bit of, "Hey, I'm the expert here," leads to the experience of faith with the net-breakingly large catch of fish. And until that moment in his life, perhaps worship for Peter has been something organised by other people that he takes part in. The moment he falls at Jesus' knees and bursts out, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man," worship has become personal, face to face. Upon Jesus telling him, "Don't be afraid, from now on you will catch men," Peter pulls his boat up on the shore and lets go the fisherman's life. Pretty soon, when the Pharisees call attention to the behaviour of the riffraff amongst his followers, Simon Peter has started to taste the kind of opposition that will always accompany God's people on their growth into maturity. This is just the beginning, but it sets the pattern. After a short while, for these ex-fishermen and tax collectors, following Jesus around has become the new normal. But then the disciples have to part with that because Jesus calls them together and sends them out with power and authority to drive out all demons and cure diseases, to preach the kingdom of God and heal the sick. They have a new set of instructions to obey. Obeying, they preach the gospel and heal people everywhere, to the extent that the dangerous figure of Herod is starting to ask questions. They have actively experienced faith and also the first stirrings of opposition. They now report to Jesus what they have done, and he takes them aside to a town called Bethsaida. Note to ourselves, growing up in Jesus will involve us in putting into words what we are seeing him do through us. Now, if we assume, as we commonly do, that such testimony is primarily for the ears of the people around us, this can lead to self-glorification. It is probably best when we start off saying it to God, in praise of him. Begin with that, and it'll lead often to reflecting with him upon what has just taken place. And then, as we declare what God has done, we can grow up, and others can grow up too. The pattern immediately repeats itself with the feeding of the 5,000. Once more, the disciples' obedience leads to an experience of faith. In this case, as they pick up a basketful each of broken pieces of bread. And immediately after this experience, Luke places the account of Peter's confession of the Christ. Again, worship is becoming more and more personal. Jesus then teaches them about the opposition that waits him and also waits for them, and says, "Whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will save it." In Matthew's Gospel, this is where Peter is renamed by Jesus, much as, remember in Genesis 35 verse 10, Jacob is renamed Israel by God. Growing up means letting go of the identity we had and receiving a new identity from him. Also in Matthew, the feeding of the 5,000 is followed by Peter's personal response to Jesus walking on the water, what you can only call a mixed experience of faith. And that brings us to the question we all have to ask: what happens when it all goes wrong? When there's a fault in this pattern, when Jesus' commands are not obeyed, and as a result there is not the experience of faith, but the experience of failure. Think of Peter's experience from Gethsemane through to his denial of Jesus. He does not watch and pray so that he will not fall into temptation. He's too tired to pray. As a result, he ends up facing the experience of opposition very much in his own strength. And it is so overwhelming for him that even a servant girl is crushingly intimidating. Can this be part of growing up too? After all, we're supposed to learn from our mistakes, aren't we? Yes, but only in this context when Jesus redeems them. And so, in John 21, we end up almost back where we started. Obedience, once more with the fishing net. The experience of the large catch. That beautiful face-to-face moment with Jesus, and the warning about the opposition to come. The pattern repeats itself again. We will grow up with it, but we will never grow out of it. If you have been, thank you for listening.